Creamer Media's Mining Weekly is speaking to Craig Sherber, the president and CEO of NextSource, into which Vision Blue, run by Sir Mick Davis, has invested. Craig, can you update us on what is happening in the world of graphite?
We have just executed an offtake agreement with ThyssenKrupp Materials. It's a very large German conglomerate. They're actually one of the largest, if not the largest, trader of battery materials and other materials in the world right now. They have over 400 offices operating in 40 different countries. So they bring a very extensive sales base for us as well. So we can actually move our graphite into a number of different jurisdictions. This will coincide with an offtake agreement that we already have with a Japanese group that supplies the Tesla supply chain. So those are the offtakes that we have in place, and then we will also be working on a value-add battery material chain.
Could South Africa be considered as a possible place to process this graphite?
Yes, absolutely. South Africa obviously is very close proximity to Madagascar, so it would be a very good spot because it's relatively close. The other aspect is a very highly trained workforce. And the other thing that's very important is South Africa has a very large automotive industry. So currently they produce about 600,000 vehicles per year. Of those 600,000, about 400,000 go into the European market. What's very important there is in order to grow that market, the whole of the European market is switching into electrification of vehicles. And so that market has to go from a different, drivetrain, from the internal combustion engine into electric vehicles and the whole battery aspect. So we see a real opportunity coming into South Africa to not only value add on the graphite, but really to start looking at consolidation of other very important battery materials. We think that there's a very strong impetus. The conversations that we've had with various, governmental organizations in South Africa, there seems to be a lot of support for that and having the value add consolidation in South Africa. So South Africa is certainly a jurisdiction that we're looking at very, very closely for this.
You just respell that out, what you'll need to do in South Africa if you do develop something here.
So far as graphite is concerned, what we've been doing in Madagascar is we actually mine the graphite out of the ground as an ore. It gets crushed and it's a flotation process. So the graphite is a hydrophobic mineral. It doesn't like water. So basically it floats. You skim off that graphite, you dry it, you put it in a bag, and then you sell it. That material you can go directly into the refractory industry. However, if you want to go into the battery anode industry, what you have to do is value add portions to it. And the value add is basically what's called spheritization. So you get the flake graphite and you spheritize it to between 5 and 25 microns in size, and then you purify it up to a battery grade, purity. So that's 99.995% carbon purity. After that step, what you do is you coat that graphite with a synthetic graphite rind. And that's usually done by the battery manufacturers themselves because it's a very technical process. So what we'd be looking to do in South Africa is doing the spheritization and the purification of that graphite. And actually the group that we're paired with right now, the group that's doing the Chinese processing for Tesla, they've just started doing the coating process as well. So we have access to that IP, which is an absolute game changer for us because after you have all of those steps in place, that's your complete anode material. And then you usually mix it with a little bit of synthetic graphite. And you, in essence, paint that onto a very thin copper foil sheet. If you do the same thing with your cathode material, you get that cathode paste and you print it onto a very thin aluminum sheet and you roll that up together into like a jelly roll, and that's essentially your lithium-ion battery. So in South Africa, you have all of the raw materials going through South Africa, either produced there or in other countries exiting South Africa right now. And what we look to do is actually consolidate the anode portion and hopefully down the road, actually the other materials as well. So you could physically start building batteries in South Africa.
And why do you call yourself Superflake registered?
So Superflake is quite an interesting aspect. So there's various grades in graphite, finished graphite products. So the actual graphite flake that gets produced at a processing facility or a graphite mine has a number of different technical parameters. So the two big ones are the carbon purity that you get out of the ground and then the size of the flakes. So we have very, very high carbon purity, but we also have very, very large flakes. So it's quite unique. And that's really because of the Madagascar style of graphite mineralization, very high kind of granulite facies metamorphic terrain. The other aspect that's quite unique about our graphite is it has unique electrical properties as well. So it meets or exceeds all of the specifications so far as reverse charge capacity is concerned for the OEMs. And that in essence gives you range when you're looking at lithium-ion batteries. And if you're looking at the expanded graphite foil industry, you're looking at what's called an expansion coefficient. So your graphite has to expand a certain amount of times before it's suitable for use in those particular industries. And then there's thermal conductivity, a number of other parameters. So our graphite meets or exceeds every single specification for every application out there, including graphene. So we've had that tested by multiple people. And so what we had done is we were actually told by an off-taker that we, in essence, have superflake the graphite that we are producing. And so we thought, well, that's quite a cute little name to differentiate ourselves. And so we basically copyrighted the name, trademarked it.
And what about hydrogen fuel cells? Anodes are used in hydrogen fuel cells. Can your anodes find their way into hydrogen fuel cells?
Absolutely. So the other aspect of graphite too, it's used as the plates in vanadium redox flow batteries as well. So lithium-ion batteries are very, very good for smaller devices. You can go up to like a large, I guess, a vehicle. That's about as large as you can make a battery for that. For larger scale grid storage, however, there's a certain parameter where lithium-ion batteries maybe are not ideal because you get thermal runaway, where you would have a vanadium redox flow battery kind of fill that gap. So graphite is basically the other kind of volumetrically significant portion in the vanadium redox flow battery as well, because it's the plates, and that's an expanded graphite that is used for that. So the graphite isn't just for lithium-ion batteries, it's basically agnostic. It's used in all the various kind of battery chemistries.
You know, we're looking to discover and develop here. We've had an absence of discovery and development after being a very big discovery place in the past. They are now setting up a new strategy, a plan to encourage exploration. You discovered this and you've developed it. That's always the best. Give us a little background on that.
Absolutely. So I was part of an exploration team that was working for a company called Nevson Resources in Eritrea. So we had helped develop a very large base metal deposit in that country. After that project was basically handed off to the engineers so they could construct the project, the geologic team was sent to Madagascar, in essence, to find another large VMS type of deposit. We didn't find the VMS deposit. We ended up finding a very large vanadium deposit in southern Madagascar in 2008. And what we had done is we developed that up basically to a PEA status. And at that time, we were looking at a relatively high capital cost. And the vanadium that we have is more suited towards the vanadium redox flow battery chemistries, as opposed to the titanomagnetites like you find in South Africa. And so at that time, I was told by management to go out and find something else. And we were essentially tripping over graphite all the time. Like you had said earlier, I was always under the impression that graphite was just used in pencils or brake liners or various aspects like that. And that was kind of, I guess, the whole nexus point where graphite was starting to be used in the lithium-ion battery industry, and it was really starting to get a little bit more spotlight. So it was ubiquitous all over the place. So we had started off with some, I guess, test holes in the region that we had, sent that off to potential off-takers to see if it was the right type of graphite. Came back with very, very positive results. So we had an active exploration program. So what we did in Madagascar is we delineated over 300 line kilometers of graphite mineralization that we can control under our licenses. So in essence, it's basically an inexhaustible resource of graphite. And then we focused on delineating a resource that we could have a 100-year mine life for, which is what we had done with the Molo graphite deposit. And that's what Vision Blue has basically invested in, the development of that.
Oh, well done. And, you know, in this world that's insisting that people are green, and that's part of your market here, people want to get green, but they're also looking at the mines and saying, are the mines green and are you clean? How are you going to be able to convince them that you're also green and clean when you mine?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, mining is still mining, but I mean, most of the materials in the world actually come from a mine one way or another. So far as the graphite is concerned, about 67% of all graphite is currently produced in China. This is in the flake graphite aspect. 100% of all the value added. So this is the spheronized and purified graphite is processed in China. There are no other processors in the world right now. It's all done in China. So what we've done is we basically partnered in having the same type of operation because it's a cost-based thing as well, because it has to make perspective for a business sense to be able to put in different jurisdictions. So what we'd be doing is utilizing the Chinese technology, moving it into different jurisdictions. So it's a non-Chinese source that mitigates the geopolitical risk. And then you can also apply all of the international standards so far as environmental protection is concerned. So far as Madagascar itself is concerned, we don't have any grid power on there. So what we'll be doing is a hybridized power solution. So it's a solar diesel powered, basically hybrid power solution that we'll be having there. Everything we've done is to equator principles as well. So we've been trying to do what we say, right things right. so far as the environmental side, because the ESG is a very important component right now, obviously, and it's going to get more so internationally as we move forward.
And have you cut down any trees? And if you have, are you going to replant them?
Oh, absolutely. We'll be planting trees. What's interesting in southern Madagascar, it has been basically denuded of forest over the last probably 2 or 3 centuries. So it's in essence where we're working, it's almost like the Karoo. So it's a very dry, arid region, but the trees that did exist in the region, they have been mostly deforested. So one of the aspects that we'll be doing in our program, obviously, is a reforestation program to try and bring that up, because there's also water scarcity issues in southern Madagascar. And it's a matter of trying to build more sustainable environment for the people that live there. And that certainly includes more trees.
And Mick Davis is well known in this area. Some people still remember him riding around on his bicycle in Port Elizabeth. But now the question I would have put to Mick is, are you guys going to list on an exchange? And if so, when?
Well, so right now, I mean, that's Vision Blue. So far as NextSource is concerned, we're on the Toronto Stock Exchange, so the main board of the Toronto Stock Exchange. We're also on the Frankfurt Exchange. We've been looking at a number of other exchanges as well. So, I mean, European exchanges down in the United States. We've also been looking in South Africa as well. And really, it depends on where we set up our next stage of operations. So it's really I guess, exchange will be dictated by where we're going to be putting up our value add processing plant.
And I'm sure you've heard of Nova Monde Graphite, where another South African, Arnie Fransen, has been very active. They are also producing a similar anode outside of China. Is this the only one, or are there a lot of companies like us at the moment?
I think Nouveau Monde is probably I guess, the other leader in that space. I'd say co-leader in the space. We get along very, very well with them. They have a very strong technical team. The interesting aspect there is, we've often heard from people from Nouveau Monde as well that we, as NextSource, probably have the best graphite deposit in the world, but we will tell them equally they have the best jurisdiction in the world. So Quebec in Canada is probably one of the best mining jurisdictions you can go to. There's different costs associated with that, obviously, but that's a very, very good project. I think one of the things to keep in context with the graphite market especially is that there is such a burgeoning growth curve that we're kind of sitting in front of right now, that it's going to take a number of projects to come online. So it's going to take a NextSource, a Nouveau Monde, and probably 4 or 5 other large projects to come online to meet the demand over the next 10 years.
Can you tell us about the need to really go downstream in this business?
Yes, no, absolutely. One of the discussions we've been having with OEMs up to this point, it's been very clear, especially in the last 18 months, that they have a number of different concerns. They're concerned about price, obviously the sureness of price, because they've had a very large scare with all of the electronics boards over the last few months here, where there's a scarcity of supply. So they don't want the same thing to happen, especially when they're switching their drivetrains over from electric or internal combustion, over to electric vehicles. They want to make sure that they have that sureness of supply and they can get the sureness of price.
Have you been made aware of our special economic zones?
Yes, we have. We've been talking with, I guess, a number of different parties about that. And so that's one of the reasons that we're looking very closely at South Africa as a jurisdiction to put our value add processing facility. Because from a cost perspective, I don't know would be the most favorable cost advantage that we have. The advantage that South Africa has, however, is that there are other materials that are going through South Africa that we have access to, and there's the ability to start consolidating those things.
What would those materials be?
Well, I mean, you look at cobalt, for example. Cobalt goes down through South Africa, copper as well. I mean, if you're looking at so far as the future demand trends are concerned, the copper market isn't going to go leaps and bounds because it has such an industrial base anyway. So electric vehicles aren't really going to be moving the needle there. However, once you get that copper and you make the battery grade foil, so it's a very thin foil, I believe it's 5 to 7 microns in thickness. Once you make that foil, you can paint that cathode on. That's a specialized value add portion to copper. There are rollers in rolling manufacturers in South Africa that can do exactly that right now. The other portion is aluminium. No, there's already groups that do that in South Africa as well. There are groups as well that do, rather than just a nickel sulfide, going to a nickel sulfate or manganese sulfate. So these are intermediary materials that go right into battery grade, compounds. And South Africa is doing a lot of that right now. There are a number of different companies that are kind of bringing together the pieces, but nobody's brought all those pieces together in a much larger play yet. And that's really where there's a huge opportunity.
That was Creamer Media's Mining Weekly, speaking to Craig Sherber the president and CEO of NextSource.